So I'm 1 week back from Costa Rica and thinking about my perimeno mavens who have had a powerful experience and need some support in the transition. I'm diving into some 5-line practical tips today to help you navigate the in-between kind of space. And if you didn't come to Costa Rica with us, then this episode is actually still for you because it's all about how to integrate your higher self, or the self that just feels like she's growing and still has to exist in like this 3D life that's kind of feels old and maybe a little stale or maybe a little weird because you're growing. So I invite you to look in the show notes for the journal prompts that I mentioned. And if you are loving this pod, remember to hit the subscribe button and share it with a friend. It is so super helpful in getting the word out there. I am your host, Lori Lisai, human design teacher and midlife coach, here to help you use human design to shed the shoulds and be who you came here to be. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Midlife by Design. This episode today is about midlife liminal spaces. So I'm thinking mainly about coming off of a retreat where you've spent maybe a full week, maybe longer, being the fullest, most authentic version of yourself in a space where you felt held, you felt seen, you felt connected with the best parts of yourself, maybe even a little wild. And then you have to come back into the real world and try to reintegrate your new self into the old. And sometimes this can happen after a retreat, of course, as I mentioned, but also something like a solo trip or even just a trip that really feels like it has transformed you in some way, where you're returning feeling like a different person. This could even be something that happens when you have a super powerful conversation with somebody. You know, maybe it's something as simple as a deep conversation that you have that completely changes your perspective and has you questioning things. So this idea of shifting from growing into a new version of yourself and having to live in an environment that reflects the old version of yourself is definitely something that pertains to retreat goers. However, there are other ways that this could happen. So I want to talk a little bit about what I think of as this liminal space, which is the threshold, the space in between where the old you doesn't fit really, doesn't feel super comfortable, but the new you is this tiny little tender shoot that's just barely coming out of the earth, you know, in this new spring. I think specifically of shores people when I think of liminal spaces, because if you have an environment that is shores, you thrive in liminal spaces, specifically the environment of a liminal space, not necessarily the energetic liminal space, although I would love to talk to more shores people about if that's your experience, because I would assume that you love that shit. But when we're thinking about midlife and all of the different identity and kind of ego deaths that can happen during midlife, for example, moving out of the good girl into the wild woman, if you're moving out of a career and into something new, if you think about mothering adults versus mothering kids or teenagers, those are all the transitional spaces, right? And learning how to thrive in those spaces is super important because essentially you need to be able to hold two truths at once. And I can't remember if I've mentioned this on the pod when we were talking about the retreat in the last episode, but I think that one of the things that I was repeatedly reminded of was this tendency to have to hold two truths at once or more. Sometimes it's more than two truths. Like two things can be true at the same time, even when they feel contradictory. So I also wanted to posit that perimenopause itself is very much a liminal space, right? It's this biological liminal space where sometimes you feel like, your mother, your good girl with the spikes in estrogen. And then sometimes when the estrogen drops, you feel like the wild woman and you don't give a shit anymore. And you have to live in that liminal space as your estrogen spikes and drops all the way through essentially a decade of your life where you're going through this long-term change. So I'm inviting you to think about right now, are you in a liminal space in your life? Are there places in your life where it feels like you're kind of holding on to two truths? Maybe you feel yourself growing in a lot of ways, and that the life around you, the life that you've been living, the environment, the people that you've been spending time with, et cetera, like those things are not feeling in sync with the new person that you are becoming. So, what happens after you have an experience like a retreat that changes you, or a conversation, or a trip, or just something that really pushes you to grow? Because life doesn't always support that same expression of yourself, right? And I'm thinking about how I sounded, for example, in the last episode. And one of my friends said, it didn't even sound like you sometimes. And I thought to myself, yeah, actually, that is a part of me that I don't often express, is the silly Lori, and the one who has like a really fiery, sassy sense of humor. And it's because I spend so much time living pretty seriously, which feels so strange to me in a lot of ways. And it's feeling stranger and stranger the more I am able to express myself and be around people that bring out that humor in me. And because you are coming away from an experience like a retreat as a new person, and you're coming into the old life, it can feel super disorienting. It almost like an alien landing on a different planet when you come back into quote unquote real life, because you've had this deep, deep experience, and it just feels like you're raw, you're so tender, and it can make you feel really lost. Like, what do I do now? And there can be a tendency to want to hold on to the experience that you had, and you can feel like you're clawing your way to like hold on to those pieces, and figure out a way to navigate this old life. And this is this process, learning how to do that, that is what integration is. And honestly, after the experience of a retreat or a trip or whatever it was that you feel transformed you, this next step is the next bravest thing that you can do for yourself. So I wanted to give you some tips for incorporating what you have gained through this experience and truly integrating it into the liminal space, understanding that this is the in between. So, tip number one is to build in some rituals. Think about some rituals that you might, maybe you enjoyed during the retreat, or you enjoyed during your trip, you enjoyed during the experience that changed you. And it helps because when we re-enter daily life after we've been through a transformative experience, it's super easy to get swept back into our old habits, right? Like, let's use nutrition as an example. You go to eating the same things that you would normally when you're at home, when you've had this beautiful reset for your nutrition. So, creating a ritual of return marks the shift, and it honors in you what has changed. And I would say that this tip would especially be powerful for those of you who have gate 5, and or which is all about routines and rituals, and or anybody with left facing arrows. Like if you have quite a few left facing arrows especially, then you tend to like strategic, more planning, that kind of thing. And so this might be a helpful tip for you. So, a couple of rituals that you might use. One could be lighting a candle each morning. And when you're lighting a candle, thinking about an intention. Maybe it's an intention that occurred during the retreat that you set during the retreat. You can revisit it. Another thing you could do that could be super fun is create a playlist that embodies your retreat self, and maybe play it during some tasks that just feel kind of ho hum, while you're vacuuming or whatever, doing the back to life kind of thing. Um, Another kind of beautiful ritual that you could do for yourself is pulling a card to set the tone for the day. If you have a deck, if you have whatever kind of deck you have, or to just order yourself a deck. Because this kind of thing can be another ritual and reminder of setting an intention for the day, or getting a message from your guides that can give you a little more direction when you're feeling kind of out of sorts or lost. So, the first tip would be about that ritual setting. The second tip would be identifying a touch tone word or symbol. So, this is where the brain loves shortcuts, right? It loves reminders, especially a perimenopause brain. So, I'm thinking about a single image or a single word that could reconnect you with the whole transformative experience that you just had. What might that be? Maybe it's something like wild woman. Maybe it's something like enough. Maybe it's something like puma. It could be anything. And picking a word that you feel reflected your experience and also exemplified your energy, I think is a beautiful thing to land on. And then you could write that word down on like a sticky note and put it someplace that you're going to see it every day. You could create like a phone background, whatever. You could keep it easy, write it on a sticky note, slap it on your mirror. If you're a defined throat, I would say speaking that word whenever your eyes pass by it or whenever you see it. If you're undefined, then just listening for it might be a fun thing to try. And notice when you hear it from others or whether you see it, when it comes into your purview. And remember that every time that happens, those are like universal winks. Those are universal breadcrumbs that are helping you to know that you're on the right path. So, tip number 3, build in a tiny integration habit. So, this is all about transformation, not sticking without action, right? When you return home from a transformative experience, it is important to take time for yourself to just sit and process. However, tiny little steps are what is going to root that transformation. Think about the 1-degree pivots that I've talked about that eventually turn the whole ship. And one thing that I might suggest with the habit is habit stacking, which is something from James Clear's book Atomic Habits, and the idea being that if you want to add another habit to your routine, consider adding it to something that you already do on the regular. So, for example, brushing your teeth, and then, you add your skincare routine right after that. So a few different a few different habits that you might consider. Maybe you consider doing a quick journal practice, like 3 minutes. What does my true self need today? Answer that question for yourself. Maybe even just something as simple as drinking your morning tea or your morning cacao slowly and intentionally. No phone, no multitasking, literally just one activity at a time. You're not distracting yourself away from the embodiment that's happening during that task, but instead using that task as an awareness to reconnect with your body. Another suggestion could be checking in with your human design strategy and authority, of course, before making decisions, even the small ones. So, thinking about how often you practiced using your strategy and authority during the retreat or during the experience, and then thinking about how can you start using that even more as you integrate back into daily life. How can you practice it every single day, at least once? Okay, tip number 4, staying in connection. And this, it helps to stay in connection because you changed in relationship to other people, right? You were on this retreat, you were in this experience because of and with other people. I think having a connection with somebody and continuing that connection can be a super supportive way to help you integrate. If you were on retreat, messaging a fellow retreat sister just to ask how they're doing, checking in with one another is a beautiful way to stay connected. I would also say that allowing yourself to keep your experience, especially the deeper details of it, close to the chest when it comes to sharing with all of the millions of people who are going to ask you about it. Be discerning. You are this tender shoot just peeking out from the soil. And there's a very good chance that sharing your experience could be met with a whole load of proverbial wet snow. So I think it's important for you to consider, what is it that you want to share of yourself? What is it about the change that you want to talk about? And if it's nothing, don't feel pressured to do that. And know that there are people who understand where you're coming from because they went through the same experience. So circling back around and having that conversation with them can really help you feel grounded and like, oh yeah, this did happen. We did experience this together. This was my reality. And I can still remember that because we can talk about the specifics of it and we can share in what our experience is coming back into the real world. The other thing that you could do is ask trusted friends, like, what do you see in me that seems like it's changed? And that might just be interesting information for you. If you feel like it's going to sway you, open heads, open ajnas, I'm talking to you. If you feel like it's going to sway you and take you out of alignment, don't ask the question. But if you feel like it would be helpful to ask trusted friends that question, then by all means. But just encouraging you to keep the connections that you made at the retreat strong. don't be afraid to reach out, to check on each other, to encourage one another, and just share in the beautiful experience that you had. Just because you're not there anymore doesn't mean that the energy can't still exist between you. Tip number 5 would be about normalizing the letdown and the resistance. Is like living in heaven for a week or however long it is and having to return. There is bound to be some resistance, and the post expansion contraction is normal. It just is. It's like when you are new and you're fresh and you're this different person feeling more expansive and you're returning to what was, there's bound to be some dissonance. So naming it helps you move through it. And just being comfortable in the discomfort is such an amazing growth marker. It's something to be really proud of yourself about. So I would encourage you to voice these things, especially defined throats, saying them out loud. Undefined throats, maybe listening for them. Of course, you can speak this out loud. You can also write it, but saying something like, of course, I feel disoriented. I've grown. I'm different. Part of me wants to go back to what was familiar, even if it wasn't working. Just naming that gives your inner child some permission to have those feelings, while your higher self is able to say, I got you. You don't have to go back to what was familiar, even when it wasn't working. We can take steps forward. Naming the discomfort and saying that it's actually proof that you're shifting. When you feel this discomfort, when you feel this dissonance, that just proves to you with your bodily feeling that things are changing for you. And again, going back to that idea of holding two truths at once, you are human. It is part of the human experience to be able to do that. And the older that we get, I think the more truths we hold at once, because we've just had more experience. All right. Tip number 6, anchoring into your body. You know how I love to talk about embodiment, and it's truly one of the fastest ways to access your truth and to build trust. So, of course, the tip that I'm going to give you is dancing to a song that reminds you of the wild woman who you met inside of yourself during the retreat, or dancing to a song that has some sort of resonance for you related to the deep experience that you had. Maybe if it was the retreat that I just hosted, maybe it's a karaoke song that you sang. Maybe it's a song that you danced to during ecstatic dance. Maybe it's a new theme song for yourself. You can think about that, but what a beautiful way to embody this new energy and just do it around the house. Dance like nobody's watching. Definitely recommend that you spend some time dancing and being in your body. Another tip would be going for a walk and asking your body, how does she feel today? Ask your defined centers what they need from you. And then another suggestion would be doing something like breath work or yoga or a shake it out moment, thinking about your open centers and how to refresh those, how to move the energy through them and not let them stay stagnant, not let that energy build up and make it mean something about you. Get rid of it, process it, shake it off. Okay. The last tip I have for you is about getting support for the integration phase. And I think that coaching is a perfect bridge between insight, which you get during something like a retreat or an experience, a solo trip, whatever, and change that actually sustains, that you are able to build upon that experience and truly integrate it and live it and be this new version of yourself. Now, for the retreat, we built our retreat as a wraparound retreat. So we already hold space for that kind of work. We have the support built in, and I'm so happy that we took that approach. I think that every retreat should be doing that. But if you are listening to this pod feeling like you are indeed in the liminal space where you're feeling like a new person, you're feeling like you're growing, and the life around you isn't quite fitting that, then I think coaching is something that can truly make a difference when you're just not really sure how to carry the magic into real life. So if you're in the in-between, let's talk. You know, I use human design as a tool to help empower you to see your strengths and then rise to that best version of you in the everyday, even when those liminal spaces challenge you. I will drop a link in the show notes, and you can schedule a clarity call if you would like to chat for us to talk about whether coaching might be a good fit for you. I will leave that in the show notes. So, something I wanted to share for my own experience was my week after the retreat, my own kind of integration period. And I would still say I'm very much still in it. But I expected it to, and it did very much feel like a cold shower. And part of it was the weather here in Vermont, which has been gray and snowy and like a never-ending winter, which is always really hard on me. And I'm sure it's hard on most everybody. But as my friend said, this weather is bullshit. And it truly is. So I felt like it reflected kind of the grayness that I was feeling inside, like not really black, not really white. It's very in between color, right? And just kind of blah. So on the first few days, I took two like long naps, and the rest of the week was feeling pretty tired, like this feeling of feeling drained. And I kind of expected it, but I also felt this disappointment, I guess, in myself because I felt like the retreat provided us with such amazing nutrition all week. We ate vegan, gluten-free. It was such a beautiful restart for my system. And I felt like when I returned, I went right back to, and listen, I don't eat like shit, but sometimes I don't get enough of the right things into my body. And you all know that I have such a sweet tooth and a pastry problem. It's not a problem. Pastries are fucking awesome. But anyway, so getting into a routine for myself that I feel is truly nourishing has been part of my journey in returning. And I wanted to share that as an example of even the hosts of retreats coming back. It's still a shift for us as well. So I invite you to reflect on a few things in your return into real life when you're feeling like you've leveled up. So the first thing would be, what did you touch in yourself that felt real during the experience? Like, what was it about this new version of yourself that you felt so deeply, that felt so real and authentic to you? That's something that you really want to hang on to. Another question I invite you to explore is, what are you afraid that you'll lose coming back into real life? What feels like it will be hard for you to maintain or hold on to? And then the last question that I invite you to reflect on is, who do you want to become now? And for those of you who were with me on the retreat, you had time to work on an action plan. So you have a pretty clear answer to this. However, I would invite you to go back and reread that action plan and see, how does it feel now being a week out? And if you weren't on the retreat, just thinking about, for you, after any kind of powerful experience, who do you want to become that is a reflection of the world in which you currently live, your 3D reality, as well as the new woman who feels transformed? So I mentioned earlier how perimenopause feels like this wild, liminal, transformative portal that we're in for a freaking decade, right? And I feel like more and more people are talking about perimenopause, and so it feels a little less like something that we have to walk alone like our moms did. However, I also think that many women still struggle with, right? And there's like women's health in general gets the total shaft, which I realize is sort of punny. But we just don't have enough research around the issues that happen for women during perimenopause, right? The 80 or 100 symptoms or whatever that we have to deal with. And so I have been looking at perimenopause through the lens of human design, and how can we use our human design to help us navigate this space and this time. And so I've created a perimenopause survival guide. I wanted to let you know because it's coming soon. I'm hoping to drop it this week. I just have to iron out some tech issues. So if you want to be the first to get in on it, then you can follow me on Instagram or Threads or Facebook. I will be sharing it there. You can get on my mailing list, which is on my website. But keep your eye out for it, because I've created something that I think is truly going to support you. It's going to give you some practical tips for helping to support your energy type through this perimenopause phase. So I'm super excited about that and wanted to mention that. Also, I have a couple of coaching spots available for the spring-ish, April to June-ish. I like to work with my one-on-one clients to design the right coaching experience on a one-on-one basis. So I say April to June, but sometimes I work with clients for 6 months, sometimes for a year. It really depends on your needs and your goals for the work that we're doing together. But essentially, if you listen to this podcast and it resonates with you, then it's, I think, a really good example of how I communicate and how I tend to work with people in the coaching space. I use your human design to help you understand the decisions that you're making, to help you understand where you're bumping up against life, to help you understand how to navigate things like perimenopause, the struggles that are happening during perimenopause. How do you actually take action or cut action out of your life and come to a feeling of more wholeness and alignment? So I have a couple of coaching spots available. If you're interested in that, I'll leave the link in the show notes to apply. The application gives me some information about where you're coming from, and then I will reach out to you via email and we'll start a conversation. You're not committing by filling out the application, but you're letting me know these are my intentions, this is what I'm looking for, and then we can go from there. So if you love this pod, then please leave a review, follow me, subscribe, share it with another wild woman who has just had an amazing experience and needs to find some ways to ground and support herself. So until next time, it truly means so much to me that you listen to Midlife by Design. So thank you so much again for listening to today's episode. I have 2 one-to-one coaching spots available for the next few months. So if you're interested, see the link in the show notes to apply for that, and I will be in touch. Again, it just tells me a little bit about you, where you're coming from, and then I'll reach out to you via email to discuss details and see whether coaching is a good fit for both of us. I am sending you the strength to let go of what no longer serves you, joy to fill your days, and clarity to be who you came here to be.